real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Open your mind.
Well, happy Friday, everyone. My red pilled family. Welcome to Conversations on the Fringe. I'm your host, Jeff Spike Wong. Of course, you can see my guest here next to us. He's no stranger to our red pilled family here. He's Jayson Garcia, producer, musician. He's also the brain trust behind the naturally inspired radio and media, right?
Yeah.
So today we're going to jump right in to talk about some of the things that Jayson and I actually just kind of landed on by accident when we were having a conversation. And once we developed that conversation, we kind of went, hey, we should tell the world on some of the things that we actually found out about. So, without any further ado, hey, Jayson, how are you, buddy?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah. I'm always fun talking with you, And so, of course, the dark side of the entertainment business is what this topic is about. And the dark side of the entertainment business, of course, has been talked about since I came on board, always about the dark, magic and the energy and so forth. But I think there's a lot more to it than that. So let's just start to go into a direction, and then we'll flush it out slowly but surely. But share with all of us, Jayson, because, we know you and Tammy, of course, from the Repill family and doing the health and talking about, of course, the current geopolitical, financials and health cares and so forth like that. But you have a rich history in music, in entertainment. Share a little bit of that with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, music is what got me into this whole conspiracy realm, so to speak. I think it does it for all of us, right? And I think I call it subliminal life lessons is what I call it, because as I was sitting there laying on the grass in front of my parents' house and staring up at the stars and just wishing that I could be a professional musician one day, I would listen to songs over and over and over. And I was listening to songs like Achilles' Last Stand by Zeppelin or No Quarter, or I was listening to, you name it, a lot of rock. But I grew up in a big family, so a pretty good variety of music that I grew up listening to. And just sitting there kind of, absorbing the music, I was more of a musician that loved the instruments. I didn't really pay attention to vocals as much. I didn't really pay attention to even lyrics as much, unless it was like Neil Peart from Rush, right? And as I would lay there, I would subliminally kind of take it in. So I was listening to the music, which has energy in itself, right? We could talk about that. But then I think my brain subconsciously was absorbing the lyrics, and so when I'm listening to Queensryche and Zeppelin and all of these bands that I loved back then, they were talking to me. Mm-hmm. And so subliminally, they were communicating with me. And I think because of that, I started to get into more of a conspiracy attitude, more of a conspiracy mindset. And I was always into different stuff, like Bigfoot, stuff like that. But I started to get into that. So I formed a band when I was in high school, 14, grabbed some friends of mine, put it together, started, learning them instruments and kind of showing them what to play and stuff. And then started writing music. And then we would go out and we started opening for bands around town. And we were playing in bars at 14. We'd have to have our parents go with us because we were, too young. And it was a lot of fun. And then we got to, around Colorado, we started played around here and got to open up for bands like 311 and bands like that out there. Yeah. And it was a lot of fun. And I think as we evolved as musicians, I didn't sing at first, and then I kind of got thrown into the role of singing, and then it really became more of a passion of mine. I was always songwriting. I was always moving in that direction, but I always took on the music as a whole. Even though I played guitar, and I got the chance to meet guys like Stevie Ray Vaughan and Ronnie James Dio, and even though I played guitar, I was I was really focused on what was happening within the structure of the song and all of the instruments, right? And so I started to develop more of a producing mindset, and that's kind of what I just really started to love and enjoy. And then as I moved through life, I started different businesses. I was an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur, and really, I started the band as a business when I was in high school. And it was because someone told me you should write off. Well, we had spent like $10,000 on band equipment. And they're like, you should write that off. Well, how do you do that? Well, you start a business and then you play around. So, it just kind of evolved from there. So anyway, as I moved forward, I did start getting into the dark side of energy, Satanism, black magic. I grew up on those teachings. And there was books on Ted Bundy and black magic and stuff around my house when I was 6 years old. So I would pick them up and look at them and just kind of study
that into your house.
Well, being Hispanic, Mexican, our kind of favorite pastime was big family, and our favorite pastime was to sit around and just tell stories. And so we would get the elders to come in and tell us all the stories about when they would move as migrants. They would move from house to house in different rural areas of America, and they would have all these experiences. Experiences of ghosts, experiences of witches, of white owls, all these different things. So it was just something that we talked about often. And because of that, we had books. My mom had books on black magic and different things, even natural health books and stuff. So, and then mystery books like, I remember when Time Life came out with that whole mysteries of mysteries explained, unexplained, or something like that, unexplained mysteries. I can't remember it now, but there was a set of books that they had released.
Sure.
And so, so we just, I grew up I just grew up in that household. It was Santeria was talked about all the time.
Sure.
And I learned about it as a young kid, just like most kids would go to church every week and learn about Bibles in Bible school. I learned about that stuff.
Yeah. Well, being an Asian background Chinese, I had similar experience as well. That the folklores, the demons, the ghosts. These were all things that was not necessarily stories. These were somewhat folklores that you got to pay attention to because it's very real. And of course, having family members, if they give you their first count experience to say, oh yeah, we've seen this, we've seen that, it definitely affects you as a kid, right? So when you're at those type of, I think, upbringing, especially at that impressionable age, the tween, right before you hit the teen. And I think a lot of us were then transitioning into musician. And I too was a huge Led Zeppelin fan. And I've often said this to folks that the reason why I got into Aleister Crowley is because of Jimmy Page. But I was introduced to Aleister Crowley because of Sgt. Pepper.
Right. And most people don't realize that.
Yeah. And when you get into the Beatles in the 60s, I wasn't that old. So I caught this a decade later after the band broke up and nobody was getting back together. But somehow there was another wave of the Beatlemania happening. And I caught that right before they shot John. Right. When that happened, it was just like, okay, we're never going to get the Beatles back together. But this story is about, the esoterics and the things they did behind the scenes. And of course, Paul is dead thing. It was very intriguing.
Right.
And of course, what follows is they do Sgt. Pepper. And then, of course, the Stones had to come up with, well, let's go do something similar, and then they pulled the Sympathy for the Devil bit and all that. And you're just kind of going, what is going on? I know as a kid, kind of fresh at all this because I moved from Taiwan to America. So it's also in the cultural shock. So when you're looking at that and you're looking at pop music and those type of things, you're kind of starting to feed into, oh, this is what's hip. This is what's cool. So you start buying into those energies. And let's talk about a little bit about that. You being a musician, talk about the energy. Let's say before you understood what it was, you knew you liked hearing and playing the guitar a certain way, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think, you know, I could feel the energy coming through the music, and people will say, oh, you know, music is a universal language, right? So, you know, most people love music. They love to dance to it. They love to sing to it. Maybe certain lyrics kind of touch them in a certain way and kind of bring out emotion. But for me, when I would listen to songs like No Quarter and I would hear the beginning part of that, and then when the drums came in, those tones, those harmonics and the frequencies of that, it hit my soul, right? I mean, it was really just, it touched my soul. So I knew there was an energy about it, and it connected to me. Like, I mean, it would make me cry. Even that young of an age, I would sit there and just cry because it was so emotional. It affected me in that way. And then I started to, as I got a little bit older, I started to understand more about the musicians and what they were involved in. Yeah. And, you know, and we could talk a little bit about kind of, you know, the music industry and stuff, and what they would do from what I had learned, what they would do back then to really even bring out more emotion in people. And we'll talk but more in a little bit more of a demonic realm, so to speak, right? In a demonic way.
So
and
how are they doing that?
So I had, as I got older, you know, I was one of those dudes that just read all of the album covers, and, you know, I knew everybody who played on every album and what they played and who wrote the song. And then back then we didn't have the internet, right? So it wasn't like, it's pretty amazing nowadays, but back then I would have to go to the library and get books, and then I would find out, oh, this person wrote, like Jimmy Page was a studio musician and played on albums, you know, and songs like Van Morrison and things, you know, before Zeppelin. Yes. And I would learn that. And then I would start connecting the dots of how they were connected and the people that they were working with. And then you start going down the realm of Aleister Crowley and who Aleister Crowley was connected to, like Jack Parsons and then L. Ron Hubbard. And you start to see pretty soon you're into music, and there's this industry that you love, and then you start to see how it's actually connected to Hollywood and everything else around it, and it's being controlled, manipulated from the outside, right? I wanted to be the guys on the inside playing the music and writing the music, but then I started to, as I grew into it, I started to understand the music industry, so to speak, and what was going on around them, and how they were brought in to do certain things, and people from the outside were brought in to do certain things so they can manipulate the energy of the music or the albums even more. Right. So like, for example, you know, I started, as I got older, started to connect to different books and different, you know, audios and articles and stuff about how Aleister Crowley had an effect on Jimmy Page, right? We all knew that. But then they're on the cover of the Beatles, and then what ends up happening to John. And then you start listening to people like Mae Brussels that was really good friends with John, about how John knew what was happening, and understand he was starting to go down the whole Kennedy aspect of it, the conspiracy behind Kennedy and what was happening there. And then you start tying to the location that John Lennon died was actually the location that they filmed Rosemary's Baby at, and I believe it was the location they filmed the movie at, but I know it had ties to Rosemary's Baby in the movie back then, which literally tells you what they're doing. It tells you about the elitists and the kind of the people behind the scenes that are into Satanism that you would never think are into Satanism, and Luciferianism ultimately. And so, you know, and so it started with black magic, learned a little bit about that. Santeria, understood that energy part of it. getting into Satanism and dabbling in that a little bit and kind of studying it and getting books like the Necronomicon and of course LaVey's Satanic Bible and stuff, which are a lot of surface. People don't realize those are kind of the surface books, those are the surface, the kind of the introduction. And then started tying it together with different movie makers and different things. And then as I got older, it kind of went away a little bit and I didn't pay attention to it as much. And then as I got older, I started to connect to other authors because they started to research it. And now it's everywhere, right? I mean, I listening to Candace the other day, and she's talking about how the Calvary Chapel is tied to the government, and how they all of these people know about Laurel Canyon, what happened there, and what was going on in the 60s, and how actually it went from the hippie movement, and the music of the 60s was really controlled and manipulated, and how it morphed into Jesus rock from the Calvary Chapel, and they started their own label. I think it was called Marantha, or I'll look up the name, but they started their own label and they started producing Christian rock, right? But it was all the same people involved. And so the energies the energies didn't change. It was the same. It was the method of distribution and the way that we were introduced to things was changing, but it never, the energy was still there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things about the music business. And let's talk about the business a little bit, because I know a lot of our Repill family probably have dabbled in regards to, wanting to be part of a band, be a rapper, be a singer, and all that good stuff. And then somehow it's like, how do you even break into this business? And one of the things that for my journey, I ended up going to Los Angeles after I peaked out in my local scene here. I mean, this is a part I was sharing with you, it's hard to play to 20 people when you were brought up around 17, 18-year-old in front of 1,000 people. And when that's gone, you're kind of going, well, gee, what should I get to the next level? And at that point, of course, let's go for the brass ring. Let's go move to Los Angeles. Let's go into the business and so forth. So once I got to Los Angeles, I scored a deal working with a record company. And then it just went to a bigger record company distribution and so forth. So the things that I got to see firsthand was just unbelievable. The kind of things you used to hear is like, really? That actually works? For instance, #1 singles on your Billboard charts are made. There is no happy accidents. If there is one, it is like the freak of the nature, the needle in the haystack, right? So I'll give you a great example. Mr. Big, right? And I think you and I talked about this story. Mr. Big with Paul Gilbert, Eric Martin, Billy Sheehan, Patrick Hay came out with, just slinging, really doing well with their first record. Everybody loved it. Second record comes out, kind of just peters out. And we're sitting there, and my position was receiving clerk. So I get all the stuff that came from Indiana. I have to put it in the system, have to check it in, and then we have to do the distribution west of the Rockies to Hawaii. And so I actually know who sold what, how much was sold to the record stores. That's actually how it's counted. It's not actually to the retailers.
Right.
Because, and this is the thing where Kiss really screwed up with the Casablanca thing. They pre-order 1 million copies of their stuff, like the solo albums, and, and if it didn't sell, it got returned. So actually it didn't go platinum until much later because it didn't really sell to the retailers or to the hands of us, the fans. Right. So here's what happened. A limo pulls up to our office in Chatsworth. And I'm going, who's in the limo? And somebody upstairs goes, oh, well, that's Herbie Herbert. Anybody who's in the business knows Herbie was a huge management in the Bill Graham San Francisco scene. And he definitely was part of Eric Martin's Sucker for a Pretty Face success. He came upstairs and they had a powwow like no other. I've never seen this type of energy in that building. That limo was there the whole day. In the following week, we're out of the norm. They made us set up a brand new release. Just to give everybody an idea, we set up releases on Thursday so it can be pulled and sent out to the stores on Friday. By Monday, you have it, or Tuesday in the bins. That's new releases. This came out on a Monday or a Tuesday. We set up just for Mr. Big. Why? I didn't know this until much later. We did this, and then the single list, two guys upstairs with their, calendar and with all the dates and so forth pinned in. We're going to make this song a #1 hit on the Billboard on this date. And what they do is they do their callings. They're, hey buddy, I need a favor and all those great stuff. Right. So of course their biggest hit is what? I Only Want to Be With You.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That song was re-released after sitting around for almost better part of 8 months. I would say that album just didn't move. Right. So after the re-release, one of the guys upstairs came to me and says, yeah, we're going to redo this and this is going to be this. And probably about, I would say 4.5 to 6 weeks, we're going to have this. And when you know it, within a day, that thing hit #1. So it's made. It's absolutely made. This is the type of business that we're in. So you have to recognize what is actually the catalyst that drives this. It's the people who actually have power, people who actually have some clout because of what they've done in the business, so-called history of it. Because if you didn't have that, who could have walked in? Any band, let's just say this. There's a good band, Skid Row, out of New Jersey. Who was their manager? Nobody knows. But he's not going to be able to get a walk in, sit down with the president of the distribution and say, hey, our boys they're on tour with Bon Jovi, but we're not selling anything. He's not going to get that. Right. So that's one of the part of the business that I saw that was just unbelievable that it was being made like that. The other aspect of it is cost factor. If you and I signed a deal back then, would have been a developmental deal, right? Like $5,000 for a demo,
right?
4 album, first 2 album is basically, you're going to just have to work your butt off, go on tour. And then hopefully by the 3rd and 4th album, you're going to become prime headliner. You're no longer the 20-minute opener or the 40-minute middle slot. You're now the 90-minute headline guy. And that's how the system revolved. I would say, 25, 30 years?
Right.
Easily going that direction. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So this is the machine that was going. And the first deal you sign, it's often the crappiest deal because for every dollar that product made, it's only being accounted for 90 cents. Did you know that?
No.
And you know why? You know what the logic behind the record label is that? Vinyl breaks in transportation. So therefore we're taking 10% off of that to alleviate the cost of it. What kind of crap is that, right? Okay, so on top of that, you have to sell, I believe the number was given to me at $1.5 million before you actually break even on the front money they give you,
right?
The touring support they give you, in the marketing dollars they put into your record. Right. So is it surprising that when we hear stuff like in Guitar Magazine interviews, Edward Van Halen's on his 3rd album, Women, Children First? Yeah, we really don't have any money. Every penny we put in, go back into the show. What he's not saying is, yeah, we don't see a penny because they never give it to us. And they just say, go back out to work, buddy.
Right.
Yeah. So,
totally.
These are the kind of things you kind of go, wow. And, remember when CDs used to come in these big boxes, right? Because we didn't want people stealing them. And they were retailing for like $15.96, $18,
right?
Just stupid prices.
Right.
The cost is 52 cents.
Right. Right.
And that to me is just mind blowing. Madonna had a great deal on that. She got her Maverick label. Remember that? When the Immaculate Madonna collection came out, I think, what was it, 90, 91?
Yeah.
That's when they shifted to Maverick. She was making a couple of bucks off that record. And that record was like $18.
Well, it's, I think people didn't realize at the time. Remember when Prince came out and he wrote slave on the side of his face?
Yes.
And so everybody's like, what are you talking about? You have all these opportunities, right? I mean, what do you mean? They prop you up. They do all this, all of these things for you. And they literally make you a superstar. Why are you bitching about this? Why are you complaining about what you're getting? But people didn't understand the background of it, like you just explained.
Yep.
And Warner Brothers, when they came in with Prince and signed him on that first deal or whatever, he did have some say. I mean, some of these guys were pushing back, and they were able to kind of dictate what they wanted as far as some terms of the record deals. Right. But at the time when he was going through that, he did one of the smartest things, in my opinion. It was late 90s. Mm-hmm. And he produced an album, went on his own. And you can always tell when these guys went on their own, right? Even though they were producers, like Prince was he clearly told you, I am the songwriter, I am the performer, I am the producer, I am the arranger, I'm the composer. Because he wanted people to know he did everything, right? Yes. And I could respect that. Prince is he's my favorite musician of all time. But the thing that he did, and those guys, when they would always kind of lose connection with their record labels, you could tell in the quality of their record. The next one they wrote, the songs were good, but the production just wasn't as good. Because they didn't have the time in the studio, and they didn't have the luxury of having the engineers and stuff there that, they would have to bring people in. They'd have to set up their own gig. And at the time, Pro Tools and stuff was out there already. So they were able to do it, but not to the multi-million dollar. And some of these studios like in LA, right. Those studios have been around for so long. They just have an energy about them. You know what I mean? They have the old equipment there that has been sounding amazing for so many years that all of a sudden these guys didn't have access to that. But what Prince did was he came out with an album, and then he went on tour. He knew people will come and see me, right? So I'll sell tickets, I'll sell out stadiums, I'll be good with that. He included the album in the ticket sale.
That's right. Yes.
And so what that did is that was his way of distributing the album, because he knew that as selling that many copies through the ticket sales was going to make him now go to the top of the charts for for the sales, right? And that was going to bring even more attention to what he was doing.
Absolutely.
And so those guys, so he was one of the first ones that had to get creative that way because of what the record labels were doing. And I think in the mid 90s, some of those guys were just getting to the point to where it was just fed up. I think they dealt with it 60s through 70s and even 80s, because in the 80s, I remember like Dio, for example, when he left Alf, even Rainbow, he was playing with Rainbow, right? Yeah. And I mean, they were doing great, right? And they were playing good gigs and everything. And then when he left Richie Blackmore, he literally had nothing. Yeah. He got in his car, he drove to LA, him and Wendy, and then that's when they ended up, he got called in to go into Black Sabbath, right? Yeah, right? And then he started to kind of gain some momentum with that, and then they offered him, before he left Black Sabbath, a deal to do on his own. But and he was having problems with Black Sabbath during Mob Rules, and then because they were wanted to mix it, and he was getting a little frustrated. But my point to that is what happened in the 80s, kind of late 70s in the 80s now, is those rock bands started to go from 5,000 capacity venues to all of a sudden now 14,000. They were selling out stadiums. So that was more of a distraction through the 80s of what was going on. They kind of kept the momentum of being able to continue to take from them in their contracts because of all of this glamorization of what was happening to rock. And then I think when 90s kind of came around and the grunge scene hit, all of a sudden they didn't need them anymore, kind of kicked them to the curb. I remember hearing Vinny Appice talk about how, one day they're playing, stadiums. And then the next day they're playing like the Bluebird Theater in Denver. He's like, it literally happened like that. Yeah. Because grunge came in, all of a sudden they didn't need him anymore. And they're like, well, you guys, we have some gigs for you over here now. Our focus is now in this direction. Yeah. And so it's so strange, right? I mean, but people,
it's a brutal business. And just from that, what you just brought into the forefront, especially when that advent of the 90s. Well, I remember when that shift happened because I was right there at the record distribution center. And I had a lot of buddies of mine that were still under contracts with the so-called hard rock glam look thing. And one of the bands is a very well known in Japan called Cried Wolf. They came out of LA. They really came out of the Bay Area. Fantastic band. They're the kind of band that you look and go, okay, they look like kind of the Firehouse, Cinderella, but man, can these guys play? Man, can that guy sing? You know, and that's the part that I loved about music, because you take somebody like, let's say we're inspired by Zeppelin. The next level inspired by Zeppelin really is Van Halen, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So Eddie doesn't play his so-called 20-minute guitar solo like a broken hand. Not discredit Jimmy Page. I'm a huge Page fan. Right. That's just his thing, you know. Right. But then when you start to moving this stuff up, where guys like Paul Gilbert, Tony McAlpine, and on, these great guitar players, Yngwie, of course, that their musicality were even more over the top, more successful. So when you can put that in a band package that everybody loved, the girls loved the spandex and the big hair with the, you know, Aquanet, that was the big explosion. Huge. To the point where if you're being played 6 times a day on MTV and then you're featured on Heavy Metal Headbangers Ball on, you know, Saturday night, you were happening.
Right.
This band was happening.
Right.
And within that shift of the, we're going to go into cargo shorts and everything suck and, you know, Madra shirts, and their deal was yanked, and all of a sudden they had no more, you know, going forward of any kind of plans. Just like that.
Well, and it just goes to show you, I don't think people, you know, realize that, you know, it's all, even back then with those types of bands and all that talent. I mean, I was so excited, man, because every year it seemed like someone better was coming out. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, oh my God. So all of a sudden you hear Eddie and you're like, oh my God. And then you hear, you know, and you still have the other guys like Blackmore and all those guys out there. And then all of a sudden Yngwie pops on the scene, right? And you're just like, what the, is he speeding up that tape? You're like, everybody's saying, oh, he's speeding up the tape, you know, and all this stuff. And then you still had kind of and you still had a lot of young players out there, Vivian and all those guys who were fantastic, you know, guitar players. Yes. And, you know, Page, in my opinion, was, and I always thought of him as this, is he was always an amazing, just this connected songwriter.
Yes.
But, you know, he lacked in you know, live performance and really wasn't the most technical player. But those guys were coming on the scene, seeing what he was writing, learning his songs, and then technically just blowing it out of the water. And I just kept thinking, oh my God, it's just going to get even better. Satriani comes out. You're just like, oh my God, what's going to happen in the 90s? I was stoked. You know, I had just saw Queensryche's Mind Crime tour. It was amazing. You know, Metallica's Black Album came out, Megadeth, and I thought, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. And then it was just like literally overnight, that stuff just went away. And so my point was, the planning of the music industry still had such a grip on it that that once they stopped putting money into it, you didn't hear about the people anymore. Yeah. And that's that. And so you're thinking, like, what happened to them? Like, what happened to Mr. Big? What happened to all these guys? That was like a dream band with all these amazing players, with Billy and Paul Gilbert and those guys. And then it started to get into kind of where they were creating more Dream Theater type bands. Mm-hmm. And I remember Terry Bozzio getting together with Steve Stevens, and you know, you started to see kind of your favorites in these bands. They were all kind of coming together and creating these little dream bands. But at that time, there was no money behind it, so they would record an album, sell a few copies, and then it would just kind of fizzle out. Yeah, you know,
and that's the part that you kind of have to go, well, why? Because it's not the talent. It definitely isn't the professionalism.
Nope.
Right.
Nope.
So here's what I actually saw, and I believe is why the shift really happened. They needed to hit the 10 to 14-year-old market. And what we were talking about are now their older brother, sister stuff that they don't want to touch. No different than when I was growing up, my friends were going, oh man, I don't listen to Lynyrd Skynyrd or Led Zeppelin. They're my older brother stuff. We're listening to Kiss and Van Halen, those type of things, right? So if you think about that shift, that to me is one of the biggest things that has culturally, continuously to create some kind of mind control within the youth, rebellioncy, promiscuous sex, drug use.
Right.
Your take on that?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I think at that time it started to almost, I could kind of see it to where when I thought I was excited for the next, almost like the next kind of plane, almost the next, realm of music, it actually, it started to get it almost seems, so here's my thought. It almost seems like it got too complicated for people, and people started to kind of dumb it down a little bit. And then what they ended up doing is, at that time, they started kind of skipping that generation. So they were going back, those people were going back to not what was the latest and what was happening in the music scene. They were going back to their parents' music. Now all of a sudden, kind of, kind of the softer 70s and stuff like that was kind of happening, and people were going back to that. I remember the early 90s because we were playing around, and that's when we even actually, we were all rockers, long hair, and we were all into metal was our main style of music, even though I grew up listening to Tower of Power and Average White Band and War and all the 50s music. And I mean, I grew up on all of that stuff. So I was very familiar with Earth, Wind, and Fire, all of that stuff. But what was happening at that time that I saw on the scene is we ended up playing 80s music when we were doing cover tunes, because those people that were kind of grew up on that in the early 80s, they were the ones that were graduating college and getting, you know what I mean? So they were loving that kind of style, right? And then I started to kind of see it kind of filter in and going back into like Steve Miller and kind of like the lighter 70s rock stuff. It wasn't necessarily real heavy into metal, but it was more into like the kind of the just regular rock, the Eagles and classic rock, right?
Yep.
And then that was almost a perfect storm to kind of lead into the grunge scene, because when it came on, it was already, it was kind of there already. And when I was excited, because I thought this is going to explode, my mind's going to explode with all these amazing players, like I said, it just kind of came to a halt, right? Yeah. And that was just the industry, deciding, making that decision that they were going to, they didn't need them anymore. They didn't need these fantastic players because people didn't give a shit about the technical side of music anymore. They kind of dumbed it down and went back to being a little bit more simple-minded, like the folk stuff coming out of the late 60s.
And let's talk about that for a second, about, like you brought up Operation Mindcrime from Queensryche. Now, I've seen Queensryche opening for Kiss when they were doing Queen of the Reich, that 4-song EP. So I was really into that band because I love Judas Priest, I love Iron Maiden, and this was like the perfect marriage, if not even more so. Right? Exactly. Okay, so when Mindcrime came out, I was just like, brilliant. This thing is brilliant. To me, it was like listening to Tommy from The Who. Right. It was that well put together. Right. But if you think about the indoctrination of that success, what the things that they sung about, especially, I don't believe in love. Mm-hmm. I never have, and I never will. Right. How, as a kid, if you think about this, you're 14 years old, you're being driven this so-called this pulse, this message, this energy. You're going to start to kind of assimilate this. You're going to become this. Because I know for me, Van Halen 1 was really like that a lot. Mm-hmm. So what was Van Halen 1? I'm running with the devil. Right. Right. From the beginning. Okay, I live my life like there's no tomorrow. Mm-hmm. I set my pace. I'm not talking about love. I ain't talking about love. Jamie's crying because why? I don't know. Love before. It was almost a mockery of unionship. Mm-hmm. It was a mockery of relationship. Mm-hmm. And it definitely was promoting the lifestyle of, hey, man, do another line, Hey, man, have another shot, Dave Roth was the very first lead singer I've ever seen walking around with a Jack bottle in his hand, drinking on stage, picking up a joint, smoking it, and just going, hey, bottoms up. Right. And the whole arena would erupt. Right. Right. So when you have that kind of, Barnum Bailey circus leader, if you will, mm-hmm. Then, of course, it's so easy to go, come on, everybody, come on in. Just like Pinocchio. Let's
Right.
all go to the island. Let's
Right.
all have fun and eat candy. Right?
Completely.
Yeah. So the 80s turned into that. And I think we all grew up and hey, I'm not going to lie. From 17, 18, doing that stuff, all the way into my 20s, still doing that stuff. That's a good 10-year span of, hey, I'm living that rock life.
Right.
Well, a lot of people weren't, right? They outgrow it. They
Right.
started assimilating. That's why they had to regenerate a new audience. This is what I've learned in the business. I was like, oh. So the band doesn't necessarily as we have a 10-year shelf life or life because of we're eventually going to get tired of it. No, it's eventually the record industry doesn't want you anymore. Doesn't
Right.
need you anymore. Unless you're a freak of nature, right? You're one of the band like Rush. I'm a huge Rush fan. I appreciate you knowing, of course, Neil Peart.
Yeah.
Opposed to, Peart is a great drummer. Every time, how can you be a Rush fan and tell me that? Right? So my whole thing about Rush is that I think they were on the brink, on the edge of pushing that magic envelope, especially with 2112. But then they didn't go all the way across. They kind of figured out that, hey, if they're going to give us free reins at this, we don't necessarily have to play that stupid game that everybody else is playing.
Right.
And then, of course, when Moving Pictures came out, that became the magnum opus to me of where they encapsulated that first, segment of the band. Like Pierce says, this is where he believes that Rush became the band that they are known for. But the next 10 years, I've realized they kept on growing and they weren't playing any of the games in regards to the dark imagery or anything like that. But I will say this, the tragedy that Neil had to endure with his personal life, was that the payback? You have to really question those type of things that happens in a person's life.
Yeah. And payback for
the kind of things that he was contributing to in that business.
Yeah.
Right? Because look at it. Robert Plant gets in a car accident in Greece. First kid dies. Clapton's kid falls out of the window. Really? I mean, these things just happen like that?
No.
Right? So when you start looking at little things like this, the biggest thing I've always said to people, because I know history of Don Arden, who was Black Sabbath's manager. Of course, his daughter is Sharon. Sharon was sent over to LA to basically see what the drunk is doing. And he's in a hotel or his little apartment with beer cans everywhere and pizzas on the coffee table. Dude is just out of his freaking mind. They knew they could control this kid.
Right.
They just knew it. How could you not? Feed him. Keep on feeding him shit. Right? When Randy decided that, you know what? Hey, I know we had a good run, but this is not really for me. I wanted to go study. This is the consummate guitarist of all guitarists because his mom was a teacher. He was a teacher. If you ever taught, this is a connection you have about conveying knowledge. You don't necessarily want to jump around like a monkey in front of 20,000 people all the time.
Right.
When he decided he'd leave, okay, see you, Randy. And then the plane crash of, the bus driver was up all night and he was, out of his mind. And, no, the more I look at it, I'm all like, no, I think there's something about the sacrificial of Randy because after that, Jake got the short end of the stick. And then things start to turn into the Prince of Darkness, right? Nobody called him Prince of Darkness until after Jake got screwed. Then Ozzy became Prince of Darkness, and the disciple that did everything he wanted was Zach.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you hit on some stuff there. Definitely want to go down those roads, man. So absolutely. So you were talking about the way that they were losing children. A lot of these artists were losing children for sure. Sacrifice, right? Yeah. Now you could, and that's the cool thing about it nowadays is that most people know what's happening. So they could do research and they know what's happening when celebrities end up losing their mom, their dad, or this happens, that happens. They know that it's tied to their fame. How is it tied to their fame? Well, it's not just, we're going to make you famous, but, we're going to have to take something from you. It's a little bit darker than that for sure. It's their way of, they suck them in, they lure them in, and they give them all of these things, right? And then they come to them one day and they say, by the way, we got to do this.
Yeah.
Right? You're already in it. You're already in it. It's just how it's happening. And it's that way for sure. But there's also an energy about it also too. What's happening? Like what is happening? Because once you start playing with that darker energy, let's go back to Rush. How did Rush get such a great deal to have full control over, their creativity on their albums? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I would love to study. I haven't studied that a little. I haven't studied that much, but let's study that a little bit. What was the symbol that was on one of their albums, right?
Oh yeah. No doubt. 2112 was their gateway.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what was this in that symbol, and what does that symbol mean in the realm of witchcraft, right? I mean, the pentagram is where the witches stand to conjure up their spells, and they use literally what's called really the Star of David. It has many names, but the 6-pointed star they have on the other side of the pentagram because that's where the demons come through. So a lot of this symbology out there and all of these symbols and what they're singing about in their songs, how did they have this foresight? How did Neil Peart have a foresight to write Red Barchetta? What is that song about? Right. It's about having to go to his uncle's house to drive a vehicle because there's no more. They're not allowed anymore to be part of that kind of realm or that kind of lifestyle. So they're secretly having to take it out and drive it, and how fun it is, and you know what I mean. And these guys have same thing with Queensryche, tying the Catholicism into what was happening through the drugs and basically the government controlling it all and calling for revolution, right? And calling for so these guys subliminally knew what was going on. Now, were they readers? Of course, Neil Peart was a reader, man. I mean, he was a very brilliant man.
Yeah.
But were they all that way, or were they seeing what was happening behind closed doors and kind of understanding that there was something bigger, something else going on, right? And so their way of their creativity and their way to communicate it to the world, whether they knew it, or not, was through their songs. And then those songs were subliminally connecting to people like me, and I started to question, well, what's going on here, right? I mean. And they're mentioning and they're talking about certain figures in their songs, and then you go research those people, and it opens up a whole new door to a new room, right? Yeah. And then you go into that room and you start to explore, and that's what it was doing for me for sure. Rush, huge Rush fan. I mean, everybody, my son makes fun of me because he's like, oh, the prog rock or whatever. But I'm like, no, it's not prog rock. Like, it's not that. Like, it's deeper than that for sure.
Oh, sure.
But those bands were they were my ultimate, Rush and people like Yngwie, Halen, Queensryche, Maiden. Judas Priest, Ozzy, somewhat. I love my favorite Ozzy album was an album that most people really don't know of. It's called "Speak of the Devil." It was a live album that he did with Brad Gillis on the guitar, and the recording and the way they redid those Sabbath tunes. I can't listen to them another way.
Right.
I grew up listening to the live versions of "Speak of the Devil." I did not grow up listening to the album versions of Iron Man. When I hear it versus what I hear on Speak of the Devil, I'm like, oh, it just doesn't compare, Yeah. And so, or The Wizard or any of those albums, it's amazing, amazing what they had put together. But, so those guys, the people that kind of survived through that, you mentioned Adrian Belew. Adrian with King Crimson, very obscure. They hit the charts and they were kind of popular, especially because of MTV and the video of Elephant Talk. Yeah. And people started to understand them a little bit, but they were a little too when you went and dove into the rest of the album, a little too complicated for people to just too much input going on, right?
Yep.
But they were able to, those guys kind of, because they kind of made it on the scene enough to get to, you knew their name and they had a cult following, and then you kind of followed them through, like Adrian Belew, into his solo career. I went and saw him here in Denver and, and met him, and At the time, he was doing more of acoustic stuff, and then he kind of looped back around into King Crimson, and then they kind of started going tour. And you started to see that in the 90s as some of these older classic rock bands were then still able to go on tour. Steely Dan came back, and so a lot of people were able to go see them that kind of grew up on that music through their parents.
Yep.
And so that was pretty cool, you know. And that's when I actually started to like that style more than the current music that was happening.
Right.
But
right.
Going back to the bands and what they were doing, like you said, Rush and you know, kind of the sacrifices that they had along the way, or maybe towards the end of their career, you do have to question, like, what was the energy behind that, and what did they have to, what kind of deal did they make? And then you start talking about deals, and you could research and start looking up, like Robert Johnson was a true story about the whole Crossroad thing, right?
Yes.
And the Crossroads are you know, it's where you go in order to basically sell your soul. That movie came out with Steve Vai was in it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so
one of my favorite movies.
Yeah. And so, you know, truths behind that what was happening in the industry, and people, it just kind of goes over most people's head, right? But when you start doing your research, you start to understand it was Robert Johnson. It wasn't just Robert Johnson. You start to understand and learn a little bit more about Quincy Jones and Rick James, even Prince. I've heard, you know, you start to research people like who was tied to Anton LaVey, you know, Jane Mansfield in Hollywood, but also Sammy Davis Jr. and all of these people that were kind of tied in. And then who were they tied to? It goes into people like Michael Aquino and people that were in the military, and then who were they tied to? Then you start to get into the military industrial complex and really start to see what kind of control the military had on all of those industries.
Yes.
And then you start to learn a little bit more about it through Laurel Canyon and what was happening in the 60s, and all of those guys that were tied into military from their kind of generationally. Right.
Absolutely.
It's fascinating.
And one of the things that, you know, with all this being said out front now, 10 years ago, I couldn't have this conversation with you, at least not on this type of platform, without people going, you're just fucking out of your mind. You're nuts. You're you know, today they're like going, really? Tell me more. And we're not making this up. I mean, you can go verify this.
Absolutely.
The biggest thing I want everybody to understand about the music industry in the entertainment business, they're not selling to you, the mom and dads. They're selling it to your kids because they're impressionable. You're not. Right. And this is why, you know, like you were bringing up, you know, great bands coming around, Steely Dan playing out. I mean, man, to go see Steely Dan, that's awesome. But look at it today. You can have Journey and Styx on the same bill with REO Speedwagon as an opening act. And you could lovely if you sold 6,000 tickets.
Right.
Okay. Back in the day, when we were in high school, growing up and so forth, Journey can come to a 16,000 seat arena and sell out 3 nights in a row because we were kids. So this is where the same thing that keeps on moving the so-called starting line. Now, I'm going to pivot just a little bit into the 90s. Do you remember when MTV started a program called Yo MTV?
For sure.
Okay. So now all of a sudden we start to see the hip hop artist. This is, of course, after Michael Jackson, the first black artist, being on MTV, and he's made it the crossover. And we're so happy that, you know, rock fans are accepting, you know, soul music and blah, 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 blah. We all know that's propaganda. That's all pure BS. Music is good music. We were having people listen to Motown that was white kids in the 60s. It wasn't something new. So this finally came back around. Yo MTV brought hip hop and rap into middle America, made it safe. So all of a sudden you got a 14-year-old kid somewhere in Illinois walking around going, yo, I kept your ass. You're thinking, wait a minute here. What's going on, right? And to give somebody, everybody out there in the audience, kind of a barometer on the culture of this. I was a second engineer, a gopher at a private island track studio in Sunset Boulevard. This is a studio that did a lot of freaking work. And I went in there, to learn not only engineering, but just knowing the function of it. Because if I was wanting to be an engineer, how much can I actually make, as a career? And I found out, no, that doesn't make enough.
Right. Absolutely.
But the thing, what I've learned is this. As soon as the controlling powers to be, which is from what they told me, it's probably just a few guys in a room that makes these decisions, that hip hop was going to be easier to control, to pull the talent, to create the product at even a tenth of the cost of what we were doing to the rock bands. And we could do the same thing on the mind control aspect of it. And I'm thinking, okay, so tell me more about this. Let's say this, a hip hop session that comes in a studio, there's no lockdown. So there is not $250 an hour for 6 weeks. Now, all of a sudden, they're coming in at $200 an hour for 4 hours. Right. So studios are suffering. They're going to scramble for every business they get. They're getting these guys coming in with cash deals. And they're sitting down with guys that's been, down in central Los Angeles and Inglewood and whatnot, come up here and cut their beats and tracks and so forth.
Right.
They're not under contract. They get a Benji or here and there and some dope on the, console, and the track is cut.
Right.
That same CD that is still sitting in your record store, still charging you $15, $16, no longer have the $100,000 investment into it.
Right.
Now it only has maybe $10,000 into it. Do you see how this business just kept on escalating and destroying the artistic integrity of it for the control factor in the almighty dollar? Right.
Right.
The other side of the coin, of course, is the guitar stuff. The guitar stuff was, it was fun. I would say Led Zeppelin was extremely creative. They gave us so many different point of views. And then Van Halen was basically a beach party, if you will, that is on guitar. And then everybody was just having a fun party, a rock and roll atmosphere. Somehow that shift between Anthrax, Megadeth, Metallica, then slowly but surely starts shifting over to Venom, to, of course, Merciful Fate, of course, then Death Angel, then, on and on. And all of a sudden, we're not hiding Satanism anymore.
Right.
He's right up front.
Right.
I remember thinking when somebody played me Ride the Lightning for the first time, I thought, man, that's a good record. However, I can't see selling out 12,000 seats with this. Because why? Because Women, Children First was happening. That was going to sell 10,000 seats. The 12,000 seats and up was for Fleetwood Macs. Right. It was for bands like the Knack, like those bands.
Right. Right.
So by the time Metallica did the Black Album, I was like really blown away. But the thing that really blew my mind was I went to Los Angeles Sports Arena. Okay, this is where they filmed the movie Rockstar with what's his name? Mark Wahlberg. Okay, so that's the same arena. Slayer was playing Season of the Abyss tour there. And I've never seen Slayer live. So, I was working for the company. So yeah, free tickets, I'll go see Slayer. I'm sitting on the side mezzanine looking down at the floor. Of course, nobody's going to put seats on the floor at a Slayer show. If they did, it didn't exist by the time I looked at it. First song come out, Rain and Blood. Iron Eagle banners drop. All this red light comes on. The entire hockey floor turns into a mosh pit.
Wow.
And it looks like Dante's Inferno. And I just said to myself, oh my God. In my mind, I just went, it's finally here. It actually became so popular, so ingrained into a culture now that you can sell this at that level. What's your feedback on that?
Well, for sure. I mean, when it started to come out, I didn't take to it. I didn't take to it because I was, again, I was the next year. I'm looking for back then. People don't realize we were on the edge of our seats waiting for that fucking album to drop. And as soon as it dropped, we get it, we listen to it, and if it blows your mind, it's not being shut off for days, right? Yeah. And so, that was what I was looking forward to. I was going towards. So when Metallica and stuff, when I first heard them and they came out in the beginning, I thought, Now remember, I was a guitar player, but my mind was already blown. My favorites were Yngwie for metal, Ravon for everything, pretty much.
Yeah.
And then I was more into like people like Vivian and those guys. I had more of an appreciation for what they were doing. And then Satriani and people like that, right? Yeah. So I was like, it's not going to get any better than that. So then when I go and I listen to other types of metal, Metallica came out and did that, I thought, I don't like the way it's produced. I mean, it's cool, like the good riffs and stuff. I just didn't like the way it was produced. When they came out with what's the album with One? I forgot.
Black is the Black Album.
Well, the one before Black.
Injustice for All.
Injustice for All.
Yeah, we will never do video.
Right. Best thing they could do, right? I mean, look at what happened to them for the Black Album. So when they got Bob Rock and they brought a real producer in, right? Yeah. I think it was Bob. Now all of a sudden they were concentrating a little bit more on tone and more on the mix, right? Yeah. And still wasn't quite there. But then the Black Album came out, boom! It was like just blew you away, right? Yeah. But as far as production goes, yeah. So, but what I was going to say is this: then I saw that transition like early 90s really is when I started to see it going into the type music and whatever. And I'm too myself. I was questioning. I was like, how are people taking this shit seriously? Well, it was again, it was the energy behind it that was getting the kids, because the goth area, the grunge and goth, boom, kind of came together, and the goth kids were all into that stuff, and the Nine Inch Nails and the electronic music back then, which was a lot more hateful, so to speak.
Yeah,
and then itchy. And then and then you had the grunge era and stuff. But I want to go back to the rap thing. So when rap came out, and I was first introduced to NWA, it was from my cousin's uncle in Denver, living in the projects. They heard that first. Wow. And I was like, interesting, because they weren't going to play it on the radio. I mean, I'm talking NWA, they're cussing and everything. Yes. So he brought it over one day, said, listen to this. We listened to it. We thought it was funny. It was off the wall. It was funny. But I personally didn't feel like it was really going to go anywhere. Yeah. But then I started to think about why is this becoming so popular? And even in the 90s, I started to ask myself, why is this so popular? Mm-hmm. So here's my theory. Okay. So in the 80s, what was happening? The government was getting in trouble for bringing in cocaine. And they weren't just bringing in cocaine. They were actually bringing in what was called crack. And if you've ever read the movie, or if you've ever read the book, they made a movie about his life called "Kill the Messenger." He was the first guy to break open the trafficking of the drugs being done by the government, the CIA. Yeah. And his name escapes me right now, but he's the one that talked about it. He wrote about it, okay? Because he got introduced to it through an actual drug lord in the States that was getting convicted, that was actually working for the government, and they tipped him off as a reporter in Sacramento, I believe. They tipped him off. He went over there to the courthouse. He saw what was happening, and then he started investigating it. And then they came after him, told him don't do it, and then he ended up suicided. He ended up getting suicided, right? And so, but what was happening in my theory was they're bringing in the coke, they're turning it into crack. What are they doing to distribute it? Taking it into the inner cities, right? Yep. Around that same time, that music was coming out. That music was all about promoting violence and promoting hating the police and kind of creating this division between police and the gangs that were around. Well, the gangs were the ones that were distributing it for the drug lords, or the government, so to speak, right? The higher ups that were in charge of it all. The gangs were the ones that were distributing it. And then at that time, they started to privatize prisons. Yes. And so the prison system actually started to grow into these supermax prisons, and they were privatized. So what they were doing is California put in the 3 strikes you're outlaw.
That's right.
Right. And they started to, and the reason why they were doing that is because they knew if we can, it's just like what they did in the early 1900s with the opium. They brought in the drugs, they fed it to the people.
Yep.
The people got hooked. They controlled their mind with music, right? And the energy of music. Yep. Right. And the movies, Boys in the Hood and stuff like that. At that time, Boys in the Hood was out. American Me came out. Blood In, Blood Out. All these, they were glorifying these gangs and how cool it was to be part of a gang. And so they were preying on the testosterone that was going on with the males in that situation. This is all happening late 80s, early 90s.
Yep.
Then they start funneling mass amounts of people into prisons.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were privatized, but the people that were really invested in it, kind of, behind closed doors, were people that were in government, invested in these prisons. So that kind of led things. So they've kind of fed all of that together. And what people don't realize, I think, is that the planning behind it, they're 30 years out in their planning. Yeah. Right now, we may see Trump doing certain things in the political sphere and what's happening here and what's happening there, but you really have to take a step back and have this elevated view and really try to think what is going to happen in 30 years, because that's how they're thinking.
That's right. That's right.
And so it all led into this kind of flow, so to speak, of bringing in the drugs, manipulating their minds through music and movies, getting them to commit crimes so then they can put them in the prisons, and keeping that going at the same time, bringing in the energy that's behind hip hop, which is the low frequency energy, which we could talk about, how that affects your mind, right? How frequency and sound frequency affects your mind. All of a sudden now you're hearing cars drive by you and the frequencies are so low, it's rattling. You don't even really hear it, but it's rattling your windows. Yes. And it has a demonic energy behind it itself, not to mention the syncopation of music. So the average, the songs that were out there were kind of emphasized on the 1 and the 3 beats, right? I mean, that kind of makes it a happy song, popular song, whatever. When hip hop came in, it was more syncopated on the 2 and the 4, or even the 3. But the rap that they were saying, they weren't really singing, so they were able to really emphasize on those beats. And those beats affect your brain, they affect your pineal gland, they affect your how you're interpreting information. And so what they're doing with that is they're literally hypnotizing you, so to speak, and then subliminally communicating to you through the lyrics of fuck the police, etc. And so all of that ties in.
Yeah, I think you're spot on every point. And that's the part that, when we look at this now, almost 30 years removed from it, and we can see it much clearer than when we were in it. Because that period of time, like you were saying, I was in my mid-20s living in Los Angeles. I thought it was just, hey, man, this is just the trend. This is just what it is. I was part of that cocaine running gang. I was part of all those craziness. And there was a lot of violence. I couldn't walk into somebody's apartment without seeing somebody's Glock sitting on the coffee table. It was just that type of culture. And you learn to become part of that culture because you accept it. This is a way of life. What you're not seeing is, like you said about the super federal penitentiary bit, there was a network of gang affiliation that was infiltrating across America through the prison system that we didn't really know about. But all of a sudden is, how do you get somebody in a rural town in Illinois having a gang affiliation? They came out of the system. They went over there because they were instructed to start up. Like Arizona, I had and I'll tell this story, and I'm not going to give any names or anything, but one of the 2 color gangs out of Los Angeles, this guy's position was a sergeant at arms. And this is always funny to me that they actually have, positions where they give ranks. But I can appreciate that because you know why? That's an organization that's also ritualistic. So they have their titles. This guy was relocated to Arizona. He was almost cleaned. When me and him were hanging, he was almost like, man, I can't deal with this type of lifestyle. Everything's this and that and so forth. Well, sad to say, 6 months later, when some of the boys from Los Angeles went to visit him in Arizona, he's knee deep into it again. He's out of his freaking mind. There's guns everywhere in the house, and he's thinking that everybody's out to get him. But he's sitting there doing tons of distribution. So, this is something that you just have to look and is really, how does this happen? It happens because there was a lot of people in government assisting these channels. This is by no means just, oh, well, this guy and this little group of gang people that was deprived and they decided to, formulate and bond together and then become something. It just doesn't work that way,
It just doesn't work that way, my brother. And I'll tell you, Arizona, well, actually, this happened in New Mexico. So Truth and Consequences, New Mexico. But Arizona was a big state for drugs. But the other part of the drug running, which was happening through, obviously cartels, but that side of the drug running wasn't the what was going on in the hip hop and the gangs, kind of in the Bloods and the Crips and everything that was going on. That was more. They made that more Hollywood, right? They made it more Hollywood. And so it was kind of attractive to those types of people. People were getting into it. Like I said, the music and everything was attracting you in that way. But what was happening in the border states like Arizona and stuff along that way is the deep, dark things that they were doing to get rid of who they didn't want around anymore. Right. And that tied into, if you ever research a James Parker Ray and a lot of they never got him on killing, but he had a torture chamber right outside his trailer in an old trailer that he built. And many times he was visited by the authorities and never dealt with. Right. And that whole thing ties into a whole other topic that we could do maybe on a different show or something. Right. But that goes into the serial killing and the trafficking. And, because what people don't realize is even though they were trafficking drugs in the, for a long time. I mean, since the opium, but really it's a good money maker. Yes. You get the drugs, you take the drugs, they're gone. Trafficking, you're making 10 to 30 times off of one person, you know what I mean? You could sell it 10 to 20, 30 times or more, right? And so that's why that was happening kind of in the darker side of New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, and tying it into the Matamoros, Mexico, and all of that.
Right.
It was interesting.
Houston's been the hub for human trafficking, being number one hub in the United States. And a lot of people are not wanting to see that reality. This report came out over 20 years ago. And I can promise you it didn't slow down, especially within the Biden administration, And you now look at the infiltration of this craziness of exposure of, okay, human trafficking, we have a problem. Pedophilia, we have a problem. And it's not like, okay, now we're finally opening up the veil. If you look at the history of this, in the 70s, all your rock stars were promoting pedophilia. All your Hollywood movies were laughing at pedophilia. Look at Vacation with Chevy Chase. There's pedo jokes in this. And we were all okay with it. What happened? Somehow we finally recognized, oh, it isn't a joke. It is absolutely the way they behave.
It is the way they behave. Notice how they'll make fun of what they really do to downplay it and make you think it's out of this world type situation, right?
Yeah.
Oh, this would never happen. Oh, we make fun of it because, it's so absurd we have to make fun of it. That's not happening. This is not happening, right? Like you said, you talked about Houston, right? Houston being it. Houston was, if you start to go down the road of serial killers and how they're tied together. The Houston was really an epicenter, like you talked about, in the 70s for trafficking and for pedophilia. There's different documentaries that you could go out and you can watch. One of them is Boys for Sale that they did like late 70s. And they talked about what was happening. Was the actual reporter what was going on in Houston. You also had the Candyman killer back then in Houston, right? And what it ended up happening is they found out that these guys weren't lone serial killers. They're actually connected in a network. And the network was, they would kill for pleasure for themselves. They would kill for others, and they would kill to film to send to the network.
Yes.
And then when they busted the Candyman in Houston, they actually uncovered over 100,000 index cards, because there was no computers back then. So all of the people that were purchasing tricks or people were all labeled on these index cards. The FBI had found it. They buried it because the people that were on those index cards were higher up all throughout the political spectrum in the United States.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And so, you know what I mean? So the trafficking was happening there. That was kind of the dark side. We talked a little bit about the music industry and how they were able to promote kind of the, let's say, the lighter side of drugs and the hip way to do it, right? Yeah. And then all that tied into eventually capturing, and they had captured a lot of them before, but eventually capturing and really coming out with the celebrities and turning them not only just musicians, but musicians and actors, kind of combining them. Jennifer Lopez, all of these different artists now, and they're outwardly promoting with their hand signals and with their connections who they have allegiance to, right? And so they know that. So the industry is not hiding it anymore. Back in the 50s when they were hiding it and they were doing everything they could to hide it, now it's completely out in the open, right? It's completely out in the open. And that's one of the reasons why most people are connected to it, because they see it, and now we have the internet, so everything goes viral. But really, they're not trying to hide it. They have not been trying to hide it since late 90s. And so, you know, it's just what we're dealing with now at this time in the music industry. And then now you have it going into AI. What are your thoughts on AI?
In regards to creating content, or are we talking about
creating songs?
Well, creating songs, it's that part you have to look at it from as an organic artist. I would think, hey, is it better to have more, or is it not? To go out there. I always felt this. As soon as drum machine showed up, AI arrived. So it wasn't just like, okay, now I wrote some lyrics and I want this guitar to do this, and then go and program the whole thing. I think we had capacity. We just didn't have the CPU where you can type in the words and just walk away from it and let that create. Because 10 years ago, I could get on a Korg Triton drum machine and so forth and create very synthetic music, but then go into post-production and make it very organic. People are not going to that last step anymore. So now it's 100% AI. Where are we hitting with this? We can't stop it.
Right.
So therefore, do I support it? No, but then again, I don't support the music anymore. I listen to Vivaldi. I listen to Mozart. I listen to Beethoven. I listen to Thelonious Monk. I listen to Count, Basie or Oscar Peterson. If I listen to anything contemporary, it's Rush or Van Halen. Right. I don't sit there and go, well, let's see what's on the radio waves anymore. I don't sit there and go, so somebody goes, oh, you got to check out this new band. As soon as I hear that new band, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to show me anything that I've not seen. Unless, something crazy like Animals as leaders. Tosin Abasi, hey, hands down, this dude just come up with some fresh stuff. I dig it. There's a lot of great guitar players out there that has done fresh stuff, but they're never going to be a mainstream artist because, it's no different than if you go to someone who's into hip hop, who's into, this so-called pop top 100s. You go, hey man, can you dig Joshua Bell? And they're going to go, Joshua who? How about Isaac Perlman? Who's that? These are two prominent violinists of our time.
Sure.
Does that matter to anybody anymore? So this is where there's a conflict. And this is why I know the industry is We're not selling to you, buddy. We're selling to your kids and your grandkids, because your grandkids is still going, oh, that Disney movie was so great, and Moana was so cool, and oh, now it's a song of I love me, I love you, and that's my girlfriend. And you're like going, wait a minute here. That's how easy it is for them to sneak something in. It's just like, ain't talking about love. I don't believe in love. Tell yourself that 1,000 times, and pretty soon, you know what? Your relationship will start falling apart. You start finding that you're not easy to get along with. You're finding that you don't like getting along with anybody else. Why? Because you don't believe in it.
Right.
That's how simple it really is about mind control.
Oh,
and I think a lot of people just don't know.
They don't know, brother. So it is all about repetition. And the way that we're going to combat mind control is to repeat it ourselves. We got to. It is proven science for thousands of years. Yeah. Proven technique for thousands of years, right? Yep. For mind control is repetition, right? Yep. Suggested, and so, and there's ways with NLP, hypnosis, and things to be able to, increase the power behind it to so it happens faster. Yeah. But the mind control is the repetition, right? You're absolutely right. And so when it comes to the AI music, I mean, I'm not for it. And I think what's going to happen is it's actually going to the human spirit is going to then develop a hunger for raw authenticity in music again. And that'll start to come back around. And then what'll happen is that raw music will be like early U2 or, the raw kind of music that they were producing maybe the early 70s, but it wasn't quite in tune and it just wasn't quite perfectly on beat, but we liked it because of that rawness. And then it'll just start to evolve again, right? And it'll start to repeat. But I mean, I guess we'll just have to see. But I think that what's happening is when I heard that a song came out that was AI, that was, on the top of the charts, I told my wife, I'm like, I'm going to start writing again. Like it's like pissing me off to the point to where I'm like, no, I can't let this happen.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
And other people don't care. I mean, and that's fine. I mean, we're all, but again, I developed early on, I developed an energy for music that is my connection to God, and so because of that, it's very personal to me. I tell my family that's very personal. My music is very personal to me. When I listen to it or whatever, I got to be like, don't interrupt me. Like I am studying and appreciating and completely in awe of what's happening right now. Right. You know what I mean? And that's how I am. That's my connection to music. So AI is going to be an interesting situation, but yeah, I mean, the industry as a whole, I don't know where it's going to go. We talked a little bit about this before, and I think what's happening now is it's forcing musicians, where back in the day, they didn't have to have business skills. They didn't have to have marketing skills. Now it's forcing them to understand that you're the whole thing now, buddy. You are the A&R person. You are the record label. You're the you're the distributor. You are the promoter of your live events. Like you're the whole thing. And now we have accessibility to the internet and things like that. So we can do that. But they are going to have to learn skill. For people who want to be a musician professionally, they're going to have to not just learn how to be the baddest fucking guitar player in the world. They're actually going to have to understand how to write music, how to produce it, how to distribute it, how to perform it live. Because live, where it lulled for a while, it actually went down in quality because people really didn't care. They were lip syncing and it was all triggered, and it was no big deal. Actually, live music is going to be appreciated to the point now to where I would say if I were a person who was going to get into the music business now and be a professional musician, I would absolutely put an entertaining live performance together, and that would be my focal point, because that's going to get the energy back up for people, and they're going to pay to go see you, and that's where you're going to be able to really make the majority of your money is playing live and touring around, and then album sales and merch and stuff will kind of secondary.
Yeah, I agree 100%. As a matter of fact, that the idea of being in a show business, in entertainment business, is not having your butt wiped by the record label anymore. And it's for the better in a lot of ways, because not only you're in control of your journey, your experience, you can actually then control your career with much more fruit down the road than, let's say, you're 40, they're throwing you away, and what do you have to show for it? Great memories, and that's it. One of the things that I remember doing a calculation, and I want to share this with everyone, is that if you have somebody who, or yourself, wanted to be in the business, you got to know several things. You got to understand how to do budget. You got to understand how to do schedule. You got to go be out there to be seen, to be relevant. You cannot be in your room on social media thinking that's going to solve the issue. That will not work. You have to go tour. You have to go to towns that nobody goes to. You have to do this relentlessly. If you have merchandise, that is great. That will not support you unless you tour to support and build that fan base. In my estimation, if you end up with a core of 5,000 fan base that will buy every piece of merchandise that you ever put out, and you need to put out a piece of merchandise of some sort every 6 weeks, you will have a career. If you don't do these things, it's going to be hard to make a living.
And I would say, and you're going to have a great career. We talked about this a little bit when we were on the phone, but you know, when my wife got into podcasting, it was 2019, right before COVID. Yeah. And she just wanted to start a podcast so she can kind of get some information out about health, right?
Yeah.
And COVID hit. We had a logistics business, had 50 employees out there, and just, you know, doing our thing. And then in about 2022, probably 2020, end of 2021, 2022, I was like, okay, let's figure out how to do this as a business, this podcasting thing, right? I didn't even call it media at the time, right? And what I figured was similar to what you're saying, right? What people need to understand is if you have a fan base of 3,000 to 5,000 loyal fans but you are producing products on a consistent basis, and your loyal fans are out there and they are supporting you by purchasing your products, you can run a $500,000 business out of your home.
Yes.
No problem. Yeah, right? With a 3,000 to 5,000 person fan base. Yeah. When I got into this and started studying it, what everybody was doing back then, or at that time, was they were trying to be this bullshit term influencer, right? And so that by being an influencer, they were trying to get millions of people, because what they thought was, if I have millions of people following me, then I will get big sponsor deals, right? And so, and I won't have to really do anything. I'll just have to hold this can of pop-up and say I drink it, and then I'll make $100,000 or whatever, right? Yeah. But what people didn't, so the organic part of it, what people didn't understand is, as they got into the podcasting industry and the media industry, when they were new to it, and they're thinking, oh shit, Joe Rogan's doing it, these people are doing it, you know, I can do this, right? But the reality of it is, they had a reputation already, they had so-called influence already, and they had funding. And what's coming out now, it's so funny, because my wife and I, when I started to look at this as a business model, I was like, okay, what do we do? How do you monetize? What do you do here? What do you do there? And then I started to understand that all of these people were getting paid. They're funded.
Yes.
And so what's coming out now, even the big people like Candace and these other people now are telling everybody, listen, they're paying. Right? What came out a month ago was Israel's paying influencers to say certain things on X, right? And so it's all coming out now. So what people thought was organic, and all of a sudden this guy is building his following up, and he's got 100,000 people on X or 1 million followers on X, and I bet he's rolling it in, and they show you all these pictures about how they're at the White House and they're doing this and they're doing that or whatever. It's actually part of the agenda. And they're being paid by that political party or whatever it may be to be at these events. Yeah. And they're allowed to be at these events because they're reporting on it. So the mainstream media, which we were all thinking the networks TV went away, because we were taught and told the networks and stuff, oh, they're all went away. It's legacy media, dinosaur media. Actually, it just evolved into where they can actually contact you and communicate you 24/7 where you are at. You don't have to go search for them. And it really didn't change hands, because the people that are funding the networks and funding the mainstream media are actually funding these so-called influencers it's just on a lower production level.
Yes.
I would say, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're doing it from their car, they're doing it from this, they're doing it from that, they're doing it from their phone. So the production level is lower. So let's compare that to what happened with rap, you said, in the industry.
Yeah.
All of a sudden they're going from having to record these big hair bands at $100,000 just to record an album. And a lot of times they had to bring in other studio musicians to finish the album because those guys were drunk off their ass or they just couldn't even play, right? And they couldn't hit it. So they were bringing in ghost players basically to fill in. So $100,000 to $150,000 later, now the album's released, and now their ass has to go on tour, and they have to play these stadiums because they need to pay this money back, right? Then it went to rap. So rap now spending $10,000 like versus the $100,000. All of a sudden the costs go way down.
Yep.
Right? So they can make more money off of what they're doing with rap. It's the same thing with media now. Yep. They're making more money off of these influencers because the influencers are using phones and they're not having to go into a $1 million studio every day to report the news, so to speak. But the funding is coming from the same people. And so I just want to say that because it's important for people to understand, what we need. And what I thought of, in 2022 is I told my wife, I was like, we don't need 100 Alex Jones. We need 10,000 100 Alex Jones, each reaching 1 million people. We need 10,000 Alex Jones reaching 1,000 people to 10,000 people, right? I mean, that's what we need, right? And then we need to be organized in a way to not have the same message or the same agenda, but just have kind of the same framework of what we're doing. And really we're getting people to open their minds and to be more critical thinkers. But that's what we need. We don't need these big media and these main shows anymore. We need to branch out. So I always encourage people to do it. And I always tell them, go do it. Go start your own show. Do this, do that. I'll help you. I'll give you some pointers or whatever. But understand, you're not going to become a Joe Rogan overnight. You're going to have to put a business plan together, and you're going to have multiple flows of income coming in to support you, just like a regular brick and mortar business has to be. It's the same concept, And so that's just what I see and what I think in media and how it ties into the music industry, like you were saying.
Yeah. I mean, you're right on top of it. You're right on top of it. And this is where, and I want to share the wisdom with the folks, because I know that we definitely still sorely need artists. We need musicians. We need expressions. We need humanity in what we do. And for us to continue to evolve into greatness, we want creativity to be shown. We want art to be part of our history. And I don't want people to get discouraged to say, hey, we're going for it because it's the money. We're going for it because it's the unlimited parties, the drugs, the women. That was a package that was basically sold to my generation. And my generation went by droves, bought guitars and spandex and Aquanet because of it. Now we have much more clarity to how we can be successful as an artist without having to compromise integrity or basically go into a path that is hard to get out of. Once you go down a path of cocaine, if you can survive it, you definitely would raise your hand and goes, yes, I know it's a tough one. The ones that didn't, lives were destroyed. Same with infidelity. Promiscuous sex destroys family. Pedophilia. Don't do it. It's something that they want you to think it's good, but it destroys the self and the awareness and also the entire humanity as a whole.
Yeah.
These are all things I'm so glad you and I had this opportunity to talk about, because I know we can go on for hours and get even deeper and deeper. And I definitely welcome, Jayson, let's get back and do this again on Conversations on the Fringe, because I know that there is so much more that we could help others to really understand. Why is it bad to have promiscuous sex, to just have partner after partner? Well, yet when I do it, why do I feel so empty? You know, well, especially I love the high of cocaine, but man, after the first peak of the wave, I'm chasing that high for the next 18 hours. Is it good for you to sit at a table to snort coke or smoke coke for 18 hours? You know, these are all things that you don't want people to have firsthand experience so they can go, oh, I tried it, man, I almost killed myself. And I'll leave with this story real quick. There was a gentleman that I met who came from a big record label position, and he was working at a warehouse position in another label that was nowhere near the prestige or anything. And I pulled him aside one day and I says, dude, what happened? And the only word he could say is, I couldn't get out of the house. I just sat in my room and smoked crack until I sold everything. That was the story.
Wow.
That was the story. And we're talking about somebody that was in a label that we all would recognize. That's why I don't want to name names. But for him to be that candid to me, to just say I could not stop smoking it, was a huge red light. And then, of course, you know, me, typical rock and roll guitar player, what did I do, right? Somewhere down the road, somebody offers, hey, you want to do this? Yeah, sure. And then when I experienced it, I kind of remember going, oh, because it was noon about 15 minutes ago, and it's almost midnight, and we didn't leave that table.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
How many people out there in chat can attest to that? So with that, any last parting words, Jayson?
No, man, I appreciate you having me on. It was a lot of fun. These are so fun. I'm usually behind the scenes, you know, watching everything, and as Tammy's doing her show and stuff. And I just, I could talk for hours and go down so many different paths. So if you ever need a guest on the fly or anything, let me know. But I just appreciate you guys, what you're doing here, you know, and you being on Red Pill and bringing this other light to artistry, right? To creativity, because one thing that I know Tammy really talks about on her show all the time is how you got to get to be creative. You got to get out there. You got to take personal responsibility, but you got to become a creator, because that's how we're going to expand our consciousness. And the only way we're going to get out of this darkness is to expand our consciousness to the point to where we are connected. And we understand, we have this elevated view of what's going on. So we don't make it so internal, and we don't take that energy on immediately like they want us to. They want us to live in that fearful state all the time. And I know when I'm creating and writing music, hours fly by, right? And so that's what you want us to get into, that flow state. So I just encourage everybody out there to find your path and to figure things out. And if you have questions, call me, throw me a call, let me know how I can help you, because I definitely want to encourage people to everyone has a voice and everyone has a message. It's just a matter of finding that confidence, right? And getting rid of the fear to get in front of the camera or the microphone and speak your message, right? Because we all have contribution.
Yeah. Well put. Yeah, so everybody like and subscribe, and of course share. I can't say enough about sharing. This is how we all learn from each other. I was a big fan of this particular show, Conversations on the Fringe, 5 years ago. I found it, stayed on it, and eventually, now I'm the host. Go figure that one, right? God
awesome.
has great ways to things. Of course, Jayson is producer for Naturally Inspired Radio with Tammy. Tammy is fantastic. I love when she comes on with Josh. Yeah. Because I think they do a really good contrasting of what's all going on and so forth. Is there anything that's exciting coming up for Naturally Inspired Radio this week?
This week, what we're going to be doing in the new year is we got a few different groups that we do. There's a lot of things that we do with Naturally Inspired, but more conversations coming on. So if people have probably noticed, on Fridays, we've been playing kind of repeats of old podcasts. Yeah. What's coming up is some newer, good conversations. She's reaching out to people right now. And, it's going to be people, I'm sure she'll be reaching out to great people like, who knows, Bruce Lipton and people like that she'll be able to bring on. And it's not just going to be about the health space and kind of your doctor. We're really going to explore consciousness a little bit more and what's happening with with our state, right, in these times right now, because we're trying to get, politics there's a lot of political shows out there. We're trying to go the other direction and get people to understand that we can all work together and still make a difference and bring our energy together, whether it be left or right. So be on the lookout for that stuff. And please, if you guys reach out to Tammy, you could text her if you want more information about what we're doing, 720-303-8868. And we support Josh and Red Pill financially. So if you guys are looking for health products and stuff, go check out the redpillhealth.info. And when you support us, you're supporting Red Pill Project.
Absolutely. And for all of course, our Red Pill family knows how hard Josh has been working. And, he's in a really unique situation. He's dead smack in Minnesota, right? And I tell this to a lot of people. It's like, if you don't believe we're actually in the middle of a civil war, you need to just look at Minnesota, because this is about as close as you're going to get. I can imagine people were in San Francisco going, what's going on out there in Georgia back in the mid 1850s, right? They really don't know. But over here, people are getting blown away and losing legs and limbs, right? It's
wild, man.
Yeah,
I keep looking out for, I'm like, he might pop up on Twitter with his phone out there and doing some street reporting or something, because I'm like, man, he's right there. Yeah, I don't know exactly where he lives, but I know he's right there. So I'm like, I'm wondering if he's thinking about it, because it's going on and on. It's just getting worse.
Yeah. And this is where it's even start to get me a little more antsier than, sure, get my popcorn and so forth. People are hurting. People are suffering. People are dying. Let's stop this. God, please. We already know there's something really not right about all this. We need to just stop this violence. And I know this is exactly the analogy a lot of people talked about. We're going to win at the end. This is that last hurrah. They're knocking down everything as they're leaving the store, getting kicked out. So prayers to everyone. Much love to you out there in the Red Pills family. Thank you, Jayson. We'll do this again. Jeff. Stay after on for a second. Let me just play our outs. Everybody like and subscribe. And then, of course, I see everybody back on my 13th Note Art of Mastery on Sunday. But I will do this. Everybody, much love, much caring, and much sharing. Just always remember, it's us, not I, that makes the difference. And we will see you on the next Conversations on the Fringe.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. The air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation. I want you to get mad.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
The more you fuck around, the more you're going to find out.
These people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy.
We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that.
I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!